This is my first cup of coffee that I ordered from a human being in more than 60 days. So.
China has some of the strictest rules on the planet, and they include the country's closed-loop system for the Olympics.
开展抗击疫情、人民战争、总体战、阻击战，最大限度保护了人民生命安全和身体健康。
Flights are canceled and commercial shipping is being redirected after China fired missiles near and over Taiwan for the first time in nearly 30 years.
We begin with a landmark meeting between two of the world's most powerful leaders, President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping.
So, President Xi, I look forward to our continuing and ongoing open and honest dialogue we've always had.
We begin this morning with the politically charged opening of the Winter Olympics in Beijing.
And all this amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
This is it. Welcome to Beijing. It's the Welcome Committee.
The U.S. had initiated a diplomatic boycott of the Games in February, pointing to allegations of human rights abuses in China's western Xinjiang region. Beijing has repeatedly denied the claims.
Canada matches what the U.S. announced and joins other allies such as Australia and the United Kingdom.
We are extremely concerned by the repeated human rights violations by the Chinese government.
Few global leaders have gone to Beijing to be at the opening, but the Russian President Vladimir Putin is there.
Chinese President Xi Jinping met Vladimir Putin in person for the first time in nearly 2 years on the sidelines of the Games. A joint statement after the meeting described their friendship as having no limits. Only weeks later, Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine.
Lockdowns.
Lockdowns have been integral in China's zero-COVID policy. After an outbreak in Shanghai in March, isolation and testing orders were issued for several residential blocks in the city.
So the calls for nuclear tests is everywhere, quite literally everywhere.
Then, the city was locked down in phases after infection numbers surged to over 3,000.
After months of saying that they won't lock down the entire city, Shanghai's government just locked down the Pudong area behind me. It'll be locked down until the 1st of April, and after that, they will lock down where I am right now, the Puxi area west of the Huangpu River.
The city's entire population of nearly 25 million was finally put under lockdown on April 5th. The restrictions were supposed to last just 4 days, but eventually stretched to 63, as the government attempted to prevent the Omicron variant from spreading.
But the result has been a food crisis, medical resources shortages, and economic disruption.
The lockdown has caused chaos at Shanghai's port, which is disrupting global supply chains and pushing up prices.
Meanwhile, infections continue to rise. A record high of 27,719 infections were recorded in a single day during Shanghai's 2-month lockdown. The lockdown was gradually lifted starting June 1st, but it would not prove to be the city's last.
The whole thing could happen again in a month or 2 months or 3 months if there's another outbreak of Omicron.
Today, China's leader Xi Jinping opened the 20th Communist Party Congress.
In a wide-ranging speech, Xi spoke about domestic and foreign policies and said the Taiwan issue was a matter for the Chinese people themselves to decide.
我们坚持以最大诚意、尽最大努力，争取和平统一的前景，但绝不承诺放弃使用武力。 保留采取一切必要措施的选项。
He also announced the country would stick to its zero-COVID policy, hailing the approach as a success.
最大限度保护了人民生命安全和身体健康，统筹疫情防控和经济社会发展取得重大积极成果。
After the Congress ended, Xi was elected president for a 3rd term, becoming the first Chinese leader to ever do so. He also announced a major leadership reshuffle that included 4 officials who were promoted.
The new appointments should allow the Chinese president to further strengthen his grip on power.
3 weeks after the Congress, Xi made his second overseas trip since the pandemic to attend the G20 summit in Bali. He met Joe Biden in person for the first time since the U.S. president took office.
And it comes at a time of heightened tensions between the United States and China.
Talks had stalled between the two countries since House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in August.
A controversial trip that sparked condemnation and fury in Beijing.
China has dispatched naval ships and warplanes and launched missiles into the Taiwan Strait as part of the biggest military drills ever seen in the region.
During their 3.5-hour meeting, the two leaders covered thorny issues, including Taiwan. Washington said both sides opposed the use and threat of nuclear weapons, referring to Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine and North Korea's missile tests.
国际社会普遍期待中美处理好彼此的关系。我们这次会面可能全世界的关注度都是最高的。我们应该同 各国一道为世界和平增强希望，为全球稳定增加信心，为共同发展增添动力。
We share responsibility, in my view, to show that China and the United States can manage our differences, prevent competition from becoming anything ever near conflict, and to find ways to work together on urgent global issues that require our mutual cooperation.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is now expected to visit China in early 2023, but political observers say there is little hope of a full thaw in bilateral tensions. China broke its own record by completing 59 space launches in 2022. The missions included delivery of the Wentian and Mengtian modules to finalize construction of the Tiangong space station.
China has sent 3 astronauts to its recently built space station and completed China's first ever crew handover in orbit.
It's a milestone for its space program, paving the way towards China's long-term crew presence in space.
China also made an important space discovery: finding water on the moon. So far, it was believed that lunar water could be created by charged particles in solar wind. But Chinese researchers found evidence that points to a water source within the moon itself. Finding water on the moon is vital for China's ambitions to build a lunar base by 2027. By the second half of 2022, China was the only major economy still holding fast to zero COVID lockdowns and mass testing. But a series of rare protests would change that. Demonstrations first erupted in China's south on November 14th, when migrant workers in Guangzhou vented their frustrations over lockdowns. Another violent protest broke out at the world's largest iPhone factory in the central province of Henan on November 22nd.
The final straw for hundreds of workers was said to be a delay in pay. Some staff complain of being bunked up with colleagues who tested positive.
2 days later, a deadly fire at a residential building in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region killed 10 people. Netizens claimed lockdown restrictions in Urumqi had prevented victims from escaping. Officials denied the claims, but crowds took to the streets anyway. A candlelight vigil for victims was held in Shanghai, but a public mourning developed into protests that eventually spread to other cities. Soon after the protests, several cities started to ease some pandemic restrictions. Then, on December 7th,
China has just announced a major nationwide easing of its zero-COVID policy.
10 new measures were announced, including ending lockdowns, home isolation for people with mild or no symptoms, lifting testing and health code rules for travelers, PCR testing only in high-risk areas, and ramping up vaccinations for the elderly. The new nationwide instructions signal China's shift away from zero COVID.
开心的，这个政策来的有点晚，但是来了总比不来好嘛。
我觉得对于这方面，我到现在为止没有太多的恐惧了，因为很多人都说了，这就跟平常感冒那个差不多了，所以说我也感觉没有害怕。
这个防疫意识要提高了，然后我觉得这个风险是个人和企业来承担了更大的部分。
COVID is now spreading across China. Hospitals are packed with patients, while morgues and funeral parlors are overwhelmed with bodies. Meanwhile, as of December 20th, only 7 people in the entire country have officially died of COVID since restrictions were eased. But healthcare officials fear there may be an even bigger surge in the next few weeks as the Lunar New Year holiday approaches. Hundreds of millions of people will be traveling back to their villages, many of whom will be bringing the virus with them.